So welcome to the second session of the day. And for this, I would like to invite the honorable chairpersons on the stage. Dr. Graham Thompson. Where is he? And Dr. Fozia Manu. Please come on the stage. Dr. Graham Thompson is a specialist consultant from Concept Perth, and he is a clinical lecturer in reproductive medicine at the University of Western Australia, with his major interest in ART, infertility surgery, and emphasis on laser laparoscopy and microsurgery. And Dr. Fozia Manu is a renowned gynecologist from Lahore, and she is a fertility expert working in Concept Lahore, and she is also a professor of gynae ops in Fatma Memorial Hospital and Medical College, Lahore. Please welcome. There are no panelists. So the speaker, Dr. Azra is. Okay. So we have three speakers for this session, Professor Arshad Chauhan and Dr. Azra Ehsan and Professor Aisha Malik. And Professor Arshad Chauhan is a consultant obstetrician and gynecologist from Lahore, and he is actively involved in all the academic activities and conducting the free training courses for FCPS and MRCOG candidates since 1999 in Lahore. And he would be shortly joining her for his presentation. And Dr. Azra Ehsan is the next presenter, who is a consultant obstetrician and gynecologist practicing clinician for past 35 years in Karachi. And she has a rich and varied experience having worked in UK, North Africa, and Middle East and Pakistan. Besides being a clinician, she also worked for public health issues and especially to improve the maternal and neonatal health, and is a technical consultant to National Committee for Maternal and Neonatal Health and president of Association of Mother and Newborns, AMAN, and she is also an honorary member of the Midwifery Association of Pakistan.
And Professor Aisha Malik.
Yes, the third speaker is Professor Aisha Malik, who is head of Department of Gynae Ops in KMC in King Edward Medical College, Lahore, and she has a special interest in assisted reproductive techniques, and under her patronship, the first IUI center has been established in Lady Wellington Hospital, Lahore, and she is also practicing at the Punjab Medical Center, Lahore.
So Professor Arshad Chauhan is just loading his presentation. He'll be here in a couple of minutes. So while we're waiting, let's have a discussion. Yeah, we've got all the experts here. Would anyone like to share a case that they are managing which is challenging for them? We've got all these experts here. Maria, anyone? No, I said any case that you would like to share with the audience. Oh, here we have the hero of the hour. Ab to taaliyan.
Yes, it's appreciation. We all are waiting for you, Professor Arshad Chauhan, please.
बिल्कुल सीधे डायरेक्ट ऊपर आ जाएं आप। आपकी इंट्रोडक्शन और तारीफें हो चुकी हैं। और डॉक्टर अजरा इस डर से नहीं जा रही थी, हमने कहा आप आ गई हैं, आप कर दें। She said no, he will be upset. So
देर से ही आता है।
माइक ऑन कर दे अपना।
उधर से उसकी उधर से करा के।
So that's our
तो
first
आज तो आपको कंप्लेन नहीं है ना तालियां बजी कि नहीं? The hero from Lahore.
Okay, so that's ovulation induction. So, you know, the major problem we were asking about self-knowledge purification.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. Thompson, Madam Fawzia Mannu, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, second time on the dais. The subject for today is in your everyday practice, whether you are an infertility person or not, but ovulation induction comes in everybody's way. And it remains a question, what's the best way to do ovulation induction? What dose should we choose and which drug should be the choice to have the desired results? You know, we all understand that ovary is filled with germ cells in intrauterine life. The maximum capital is achieved by 20 weeks of intrauterine age, and it is in millions. And from that point, it starts regressing, and ultimately, if you look at this graph, it says that at birth you have around 7 million germ cells in the ovary, which size down to 400,000 at puberty, but it's only 400 or 500 germ cells or oocytes or follicles which are required for the reproductive age. What you need to understand in the lecture today is that every germ cell differs from the other germ cell in its sensitivity to FSH. They are recruited every month. Around 12 follicles are recruited every month, out of which they grow at a rate of 2 millimeters per day. And when the first one reaches 10 millimeters, the others regress and that dominates to become a dominant follicle. That is nature's formula to give you singleton pregnancy. You know, in the Western world or in the developed world, multiple gestation is considered as a side effect. But if you do a survey in your country, and if you ask anybody, which I have, every woman is joyed to hear that I can have twins from your treatment. If you ask them what would be your reaction to twin pregnancy, and she or he, the couple, would be joyed with the news that they can have twins. Therefore, whether it is a side effect or benefit, but at the same time, the next question they will ask you is, can I have both boys? So, if you give them boys, they are happy to have 4 together rather than going through it 4 times. But as an obstetrician, we must understand that multiple pregnancy has its side effects, its complications, its difficulties. And pregnancies beyond twins very commonly do not reach to the time of term, and they deliver somewhere through the pregnancy. If we want to understand ovulation induction, we need to understand this diagram. I'm sure you all have been reading it from your medical school, from the first year MBBS. When we were studying physiology, we have seen this diagram. But today you are going to look at it from the point of view which drug acts at which part of this diagram. Can I have the pointer, please? Pointer. No? यहाँ पे? Thank you. You know, we need to understand what's the role of pituitary in ovulation induction. Pituitary has its inbuilt capacity to produce LH and FSH under the control of hypothalamus. But patients who have hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, they have poorly functioning pituitary. The LH and FSH is produced in less quantity. Such patients need to be treated with exogenous LH and FSH, which is called gonadotrophins. Fortunately, we have gonadotrophins available in the market, and they can be administered to the patients, and patients of hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism are treatable entity. But what we need to understand about clomiphene citrate and the aromatase inhibitors, which is letrozole, you know what's the function of clomiphene citrate? The ovaries function and produce estrogen. Estrogen circulates in the body, in the blood, and pituitary gets a sense of the estrogen levels, and it produces LH, FSH in the response to the quantity of estrogen which is circulating in the body. Clomiphene citrate blocks the receptors in the pituitary and makes the pituitary feel that body does not have estrogen. Hence, the pituitary produces more LH and FSH. On the other hand, the aromatase inhibitors actually block the synthesis of estrogen. They do not do anything with the pituitary. They block production or conversion of androgens into estrogen through the aromatase enzymes, and actually there is deficiency of estrogen. That's why it is a suitable medication in women who have high levels of estrogen, particularly the polycystic ovarian disease. So if you keep this diagram in your mind, you will understand what drug and what dose should we use. In 35% of the patients, the ovulatory disorder exists. Ovulation induction means that we give medication to the woman to produce one or more eggs. There are medical ways of doing it, and there is ovarian drilling. Now, all over the world, people have started to talk against ovarian drilling, and we, the followers of the Western world, do not consider what is the situation in our country. We take a guideline and we follow it blindly without considering the situation in our own country. But I, through the years, have felt that patients coming from southern Punjab, they have a typical polycystic appearance of round face, hair growth, and obesity, and amenorrhea. They do not respond to the conventional medication. If we talk against laparoscopic ovarian drilling and we say that this modality is outdated and it should not be used, I would say it would not be justified with the treatment modality. And I, through my experience, I can say that laparoscopic ovarian drilling does have a role in our society, and it should not be written off that this has gone and it causes premature ovarian failure. Those who want to read through the laparoscopic ovarian drilling must understand the depth of drilling is the most important element. And if you burn the stroma within the ovary, surely it will affect the blood flow through the ovary and it may affect its function. Otherwise, if you do it 4 punctures of 4 millimeters depth, it will not harm the stroma, and it will help those who were treated previously with wedge resection when the Stein-Leventhal syndrome was described. So it may have side effects, but at the same time we should not go completely against it, and its use is still useful in a specific group of patients in our country where they actually have polycystic ovarian syndrome. When we come to the medical treatment, what or what difficulties are we facing? There is wide range of medicines available to induce ovulation. The different doses are used by different individuals. Which is the ideal drug? What is the ideal dose? Which would give us the desired number of eggs and desired number of pregnancies which reach to term, and it does not cause any side effect, will remain a question for times to come, and we do not have answer to this question. But everything is relative. Some are better in one way, others are better in the other way. But in routine use of ovulation induction outside IVF, we are giving medication to encourage recruitment. By word recruitment, we mean that on day 2 of the cycle, around 12 germ cells, follicles, are selected for that particular month. One of them leads to maturity, crosses 10 millimeters, and the others undergo atresia. In IVF, we want higher number of follicles, and FSH is needed for the early growth of follicle, while LH and FSH are required for the subsequent development of the follicles. What we want to know, or what message do you want to take home today, is that every patient needs to be individualized for the selection of drugs, medicines, and the dose. What was our yesterday when we learned about ovulation induction? Few decades ago, when IVF came in, we wanted to have more and more eggs, but that resulted in OHSS. Then we thought that we should have low number of follicles, and then we reduced the medication to very low levels. The OHSS was not there, but pregnancy was not there as well. So what is our future? Every individual needs a specific regime and specific drug dose that should be tailored according to certain parameters, which I am going to talk about. But before I go for that, I want you to understand the normal mechanism of ovulation. There are 4 things which I would like to talk about. The FSH threshold, the window, the ceiling effect of LH, and premature LH surge. You know what is FSH threshold? What's the normal level of FSH? 2 to 10 is generally considered as the normal baseline day 2 FSH. A minimum level is required for FSH to go up to sensitize a follicle to grow. And every follicle differs in the threshold for FSH. The most sensitive, we want to raise the FSH level for the most sensitive follicle to start growing, and we adjust the dose accordingly. What is FSH window? The FSH level goes above the threshold level and stays above the FSH level for 2 to 5 days. During that period, the dominant follicle crosses the 10 millimeters level, and once 10 millimeters is achieved, the FSH drops. And that dropping of FSH is a control over the number of follicles to go to mature size. It is a step against twinning and promoting single egg growth. In a stimulated cycle, which is the IVF cycle, what primarily we are doing in ovulation induction is that we break this control on one egg dominance and we allow more follicles to dominate. I will describe it in this diagram. Be with me, and this is unstimulated cycle. In this cycle, if you see, from day 2 of the cycle, the FSH goes above the threshold level. This is the minimum level we need for the follicles to be stimulated. the FSH goes above the threshold level and it stays up for a few days, and on day 5 it drops back. That means that all these follicles were recruited, and one once crossed the 10 millimeter, the others underwent atresia. So only one follicle went up. This is the stimulated cycle. And in stimulated cycle, there are 3 differences. One, the FSH goes up very sharply, much higher than the normal one, and it does not drop back. We do not let it fall back till the HCG injection is given. And all follicles which were recruited, they all grow to the dominant follicles. So that's the FSH window. That's what we follow in ovulation induction. We raise the FSH level far above the threshold level, and we maintain it above threshold level for a longer period of time, and we have growth of multiple follicles. While the situation is different with the LH, if LH is below certain level, it does not act, and if it goes above certain level, it have adverse effects. It has a ceiling effect. And what do we want to know about it? That's the picture which we want to see. If FSH level is under 1.2, it is below the threshold level. In that case, you will see that follicles will not grow, the oocyte development will be compromised, granulosa cell proliferation is suppressed, and there is premature luteinization. If LH level, that's the ceiling effect. If it stays between 1.2 and 5, you have adequate effect and benefit of LH. If it goes above the ceiling level, it again interferes with the growth of the follicle. What drugs should we select and how do we do that? The patients are categorized into hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, normogonadotrophic hypogonadism, hypergonadotrophic hypogonadism, and hyperprolactinemia. I would like to talk about hyperprolactinemia on this slide, that we are doing prolactin on every woman coming for infertility among the hormone analysis. And if the normal range says that it should be below 20 and the report is 25, everybody gets worried and women are prescribed with prolactin lowering drugs. But generally speaking, we must understand that prolactin goes up under various physiological situations, which include stress, which is very common in infertile couples. Stress is common when they actually go to visit a doctor. It is a stressful thing because doctor might say something which will not be very happy and desirable. So if you have prolactin level, generally it is said that prolactin lowering drugs should be prescribed when it goes double the normal limit. If you have 20 as the cutoff level and if it crosses 40, then we should consider prescription of prolactin lowering drugs. Otherwise, it's physiological and not pathological. Second thing, when should we suspect an intracranial lesion in the form of microadenoma or macroadenoma? Once the prolactin level crosses 5 times, then there is a probability of having an intracranial lesion, and MRI skull or brain should be indicated or should be prescribed. Which drug is useful for patients with hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism? LH is important in every ovulation induction. Hence, pure FSH prescribed to hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism will not work. It's always better to give a combination of the two to the patients with hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism. While in case of normogonadotrophin, FSH is a predominant medication which is prescribed, but some LH would be required in those cases as well. Those who have elevated or they are hypergonadotrophic hypogonadism, they are the entity which are difficult to treat. The diagnosis needs to be explained to the couple according to the situation. If you say it very bluntly, the husband would be willing to do second marriage, and your word can spoil the life of that woman if you bluntly say that you can never conceive. So the counseling of this couple should be done individually, and with their consent it should be done collectively rather than saying it on the face of everybody, and that can cause interference within the family. The woman should be spoken to first, and you should talk to her and take her opinion, and then you should share the information which is allowed by her to the husband, and that way they can understand things in the coming times. The drugs which are used are clomiphene citrate, bromocriptine, letrozole, and injectable gonadotrophins. There are I have spoken about the bromocriptine, that how and when it should be prescribed. There are two side effects related to bromocriptine. One, it causes nausea and vomiting, so it should always be taken after meals. Two, it causes postural hypotension, so it should be taken as last thing in the night in a very small dose, and then in 2 weeks' time, the dose can be increased in 4 weeks' time. The prolactin level in hyperprolactinemia with bromocriptine takes 6 weeks to drop back, and in 3 months, woman who is going through amenorrhea will have restoration of menstruation if the medication is taken appropriately. There is a new drug which is called cabergoline. It comes with the name of Dostinex. It does not have the side effects of bromocriptine, but it is expensive medication. It is given once a week. The one tablet costs about 600 rupees. So you have to think about it before prescribing whether patient can afford that drug or not. About letrozole, letrozole promotes single egg formation and is basically not approved by the FDA for ovulation induction. But in Pakistan, we have various varieties of letrozole, and many patients are being treated with it. And the major indication for letrozole is where the patient has gone resistant to the clomiphene citrate. This is a very useful diagram. It says when should we use injections in our clinical practice. If you look at the start, you start the oral medication, which is clomiphene citrate, as a dose of 50 milligram. If it is not effective, you increase to 100 to 150. At whatever dose you achieve the ovulation, you give it for 2 to 3 months. And if you do not have a response to 150, you use injections. If you do not get pregnancy out of 2 to 3 cycles where the ovulation is occurring, then you give injections. If there is a problem with the endometrium, then you use injections, and if there is hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, then you use injections, which is gonadotrophins. What are the benefits of oral therapy? It goes without saying that oral medication is the best, because it is easy to take and it is generally less expensive than the other routes. And if you give it in a lower dose, it does not cause ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. But here I would like to share with you that bromocriptine, the Dostinex, which I have told you about, is very useful in treating or preventing OHSS. I'll come to the slide of OHSS and I'll tell you something else about it. But when we are using tablets, the incidence of multiple pregnancy is less and the OHSS is less. Injections, there are various types of injection which comes from the urine of postmenopausal women. There is recombinant FSH and HCG is the other one. When you are selecting a dose for ovulation induction drug, What are the parameters which are used in patient selection? When I say that the drug should be individualized, I'm talking about the certain parameters. And what are those parameters which are used for individualization? One is patient's age. Second is antral follicular count. Third is AMH, FSH, and estradiol levels. These are the tools which are used, but you know who is the best patient? The best patient is a woman between 20 and 35 years of age, BMI normal, FSH level low at day 2, antral count 6 to 10, shorter duration of infertility, previous live birth or previous successful IVF, are the patient where we expect that ovulation induction is going to be effective and results will come. Now, if we look at age as a solo factor, what drug and what dose would you use? If we are talking about injections, generally 50 to 75 international units are enough per day as a starting dose in patients who are under 35 years of age. But patients beyond 35 years of age would need a higher dosage of injections for ovulation induction. Generally, women, if we take age as the solo factor, generally women behave similarly between the age 20 and 35. The character changes after 35 years of age, and there is a serious change after 40 years of age. What is meant by antral follicle? If you do a transvaginal ultrasound on day 2 of the menstrual cycle, you will find 2 to 8 millimeter size follicles in the ovary spread all over. And the number of antral follicles are the germ cells which are recruited for that cycle, and they all can be matured with the use of injections by breaking the control of single egg formation. Who are the poor responders? The poor responders are those where we retrieve less than 4 oocytes, and if you get more than 15 egg pickup, then it is overresponse. This is a slide which tells you, I would like you to concentrate on this line. If we want to choose a patient purely based upon number of antral follicles, what number of antral follicles is most appropriate with the highest number of eggs without a super increased risk of OHSS? So if you have 5 to 30 antral follicles, the response comes into good, rather excellent, and you know the risk of OHSS is medium with the highest pregnancy rate. If you go above this line, the OHSS is low, but egg numbers is low as well. But if you go below this line, you will see OHSS is standing there waiting for you that I am going to come in play. If we talk about AMH, a level of AMH below 0.8 nanogram per milliliters indicates low responsiveness, and AMH above 3.6 nanograms is high response. So we can take age in consideration, we can take antral follicles in consideration, and we can take AMH in consideration for selection of drugs and the dose. And then we tailor it accordingly. This is a nomogram. It's a very interesting slide, and I would like all of you to look at it. It says, if the woman is 32 years of age and has antral follicular count of 12 and FSH level of 5, the dose required will be around 200 for the FSH. If you want to count, you are using the FSH level, you are using the antral count, and you are using the age. And by that you can calculate the dose of treatment, and starting treatment is around 200 units of FSH. This is another nomogram which is taking AMH into consideration instead of antral follicular count. And you can draw a line from 32 years of age to this level, and this will fall back to FSH level of 5, and you will find the dose somewhere here. So these parameters are used for selection of dosage. What's the role of serum estradiol? If you have serum estradiol of below 300 picograms at day 8, the woman is in poor responder group. If you have less than 300 at day 5, but more than 300 on day 8, you are into medium category. But if somebody has estradiol more than 300 on day 5, she will be the high responder and lower dose would be required. A guideline for IVF stimulation, general guideline, right dose. You know, first of all, the starting dose falls between 100 and 350 international units per day. You take consideration, depending upon the age, the antral follicular count, FSH level, and anti-Mullerian hormone, you can choose between 100 and 350 international units. There is a step down way of stimulation and there is step up way of stimulation. Step down means you start on a higher dose, and once you have achieved a significant number of dominant follicles which have crossed 10 millimeters barrier, then you can actually reduce the dose into maintenance dose and they will all mature to the desired level. If you have mid-cycle decrease in the growth of follicles, in that case increasing injections would not increase the response, and rather than increasing the combination of LH and FSH, if we increase the recombinant LH, it will give you better results. And recombinant LH in a dose of 150 is better than the dose of 75. Once you get the mature follicle, HCG is given, and I tell you, the egg maturation injection can be a recombinant LH in place of HCG. And the recommended dose is 15,000 to 30,000 international units single dose in comparison with 5,000 of HCG with less OHSS. So this is an alternative option. What's the step down way of, that was step down, this is step up. The next is step up, how we raise the dose. Starting dose is 37.5 to 50, and if we do not get follicles beyond 10 on day 7, we increase by 37.5 per day, and this way, once we achieve the highest dose, we go for the HCG injection. But I tell you, this is the step up and this is the step down way of ovulation induction. But generally speaking, step down is far better than step up, because this midway rise in the HMG injections does not increase the number of recruitment of follicles. OHSS. You will only understand OHSS once you confront it. No matter what books you have read, no matter how many conferences you have attended, no matter how many courses you have attended, no matter how many lectures you have attended, OHSS will only be understood once you see it. It's a life-threatening situation in the full-blown form. How can we prevent it? You know, if we do not give HCG injection, the OHSS is least likely to develop. And bromocriptine or dopergine or Dostinex are the drugs which actually can control OHSS. Otherwise, electrolyte balance needs to be corrected, and there are lots of measures which we do, which includes tapping of the abdomen as well once we have ascites. But OHSS is a serious complication, and we should try to avoid it as far as we can. The use of antagonists, GnRH antagonist, has actually resulted in reduction of OHSS. You will see it on your way. If you want to list the characteristics of women who are poor responders and where you would need higher dosage and where you need to keep your hopes not that high that ovulation induction will come your way or you will have an achievement, are women above 40 years of age, FSH more than 10, AMH less than 1.1, previously cancelled cycle, prolonged ovulation induction time, and increase in the gonadotrophin number with only 3 to 5 follicles retrieved. The results are not that good. Polycystic ovarian disease. We all know that every woman in Pakistan has polycystic unless proved otherwise. That's the way it is when we sit in an infertility clinic and every ultrasound report is coming with whatever, at the end it says the woman has polycystic ovarian disease. That means we need to actually sharpen our criteria for diagnosing polycystic and not putting it on every woman to make a point that I am the radiologist who knows what polycystic ovarian disease is. The response is going to be poor in polycystic ovarian disease. That is the dilemma. If we find a drug for polycystic ovarian disease, the dose has to be high. If the dose is high, it has to be expensive. If high dose is used, it leads to OHSS. And if we have polycystic in force and ovulation, the miscarriage rate is high in polycystic ovarian disease. So there is no one size fit for all PCOS. We have to treat it differently. Metformin, I'm sure everybody does, and it is the drug which is used very widely in Pakistan for treatment of infertility, for the treatment of polycystic ovarian disease. But studies are favoring this drug that if you give it, there is 3.88 times rise in ovulation rate if it is given alone, and if it is given in combination with clomiphene citrate, the ovulation induction is significantly higher. The dosage for metformin recommended for polycystic ovarian disease is 500 to 853 times a day, but at this dose it causes diarrhea very commonly. If your patient gets GI upset, the dose can be reduced and subsequently it can be increased in increments. But 1 minute रह गया, 2 स्लाइडें रह गई, अगर आप इजाज़त दें तो मैं बोल लूँ. The treatment strategies, I have already spoken about it, that antagonists have come up very effectively in reducing the incidence of OHSS. So those who are doing IVF cycles, they would know that the use of agonists have gone down gradually in Pakistan, and antagonist is coming up with the less complications and best results. So this is the last slide. It says whatever drug you choose, whatever dose should you choose, it should be safe and as close to nature as possible. It should be individualized, it should be patient friendly, it should be cost effective, it should avoid complication, and it should give results. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you, Professor Arshad, for a useful and comprehensive presentation, which has cleared many misconceptions. So, our next speaker is Dr. Azra Ahsan. Please join us for presentation.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Sunday and quite early in the day also. So really people who are interested to keep on learning are here. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about recurrent pregnancy loss and its evidence-based management. So I looked at the RCOG Green Top guidelines, the NICE guidelines, and the ESHRE guidelines, which were updated December 2018. So there is even a debate which is ongoing about the definition of recurrent pregnancy loss. It was defined as 3 consecutive pregnancy losses when we were studying and until recently, but it is now defined as loss of 2 or more pregnancies, and it affects around 1 to 2% of couples. And there is significant debate in the literature about the definition of RPL, and more specifically, the extent to which this definition needs to be extended or constricted based on the number of losses and whether these are consecutive or not. If you look at the etiology of recurrent pregnancy loss, and if you look at this chart, the biggest chunk is unexplained, which is 50% of the total recurrent pregnancy losses. Chromosomal aberrations are responsible for 3%, anatomical abnormalities for 12%, endocrine for 19%, and antiphospholipid syndrome 60% of the recurrent pregnancy losses. So what are the risk factors for recurrent pregnancy loss? There are epidemiological factors, antiphospholipid syndrome, genetic factors, which includes parental chromosomal rearrangements and embryonic chromosomal abnormalities. Then there are anatomical factors, which includes congenital uterine malformations and cervical weakness, endocrine factors, immune factors, infective agents, and inherited thrombophilic defects. The risk factor for recurrent pregnancy loss includes a significant factor is advancing maternal age, and there is a decline in the number and quality of oocytes. The risk of miscarriage with age increases, and as you can see, after 35, it's 25%, which increased to 51% between the ages of 40 to 44, and 93% after the lady is 45. And it has been identified as a risk factor for miscarriage. It's highest among couples where the woman is more than 35 and the man is more than 40 years of age. The number of previous pregnancy losses is also an indicator for RPL, and the risk of further miscarriage increases after each successive pregnancy loss, reaching approximately 40% after 3 consecutive pregnancy losses. Prognosis worsens with increasing maternal age, and a previous live birth does not preclude a woman developing recurrent pregnancy loss. What are the environmental risk factors? Cigarette smoking has been associated with an increased risk of spontaneous miscarriage. We all know heavy alcohol consumption is toxic to the embryo and the fetus, and even moderate consumption of 5 or more units per week may increase the risk of sporadic miscarriage. Video display terminals do not increase the risk of miscarriage. And there is insufficient evidence for recommendations on other lifestyle factors, including exercise and caffeine intake. The evidence on the effect of anesthetic gases for theater workers is also conflicting. However, obesity and underweight increases the risk of both sporadic and recurrent miscarriage. Coming to antiphospholipid syndrome, it is the most treatable cause of RPL, and it refers to the association between antiphospholipid antibodies and adverse pregnancy outcome or vascular thrombosis. Phospholipid antibodies include lupus anticoagulant, anticardiolabin antibodies IgG and IgM, and anti-beta 2 glycoprotein antibodies. For parental chromosomal rearrangements in approximately 2 to 5% of couples with RPL, one of the partner carries a balanced structural chromosomal anomaly. Although carriers of a balanced translocation are phenotypically normal, but their pregnancies are at increased risk of miscarriage and may result in a live birth with multiple congenital malformations or a child with mental disability secondary to an unbalanced chromosomal arrangement. The risk of miscarriage is influenced by the size and the genetic content of the rearranged chromosomal segments. The embryonic chromosomal abnormalities are responsible for 30 to 57% of further miscarriages, and the risk of miscarriage resulting from chromosomal abnormality of the embryo increases with advancing maternal age. As far as congenital uterine malformations are concerned, exact contribution to recurrent miscarriage remains unclear. Prevalence of uterine anomalies ranges between 1.8 to 37.6%, and prevalence appears to be higher in second trimester miscarriage. This may be related to cervical weakness frequently associated with uterine malformations. Cervical weakness, it is a recognized cause of second trimester miscarriage, and the true incidence is unknown. Diagnosis is essentially a clinical one, and there is no satisfactory objective test that can identify cervical weakness in the non-pregnant state. The diagnosis is usually based on a history of second trimester miscarriage preceded by spontaneous rupture of membranes or painless cervical dilatation. The endocrine factors such as diabetes, mellitus, and thyroid disease have been associated with recurrent pregnancy loss. High hemoglobin A1C levels in the first trimester increase risk of miscarriage and fetal malformation. Well-controlled diabetes mellitus is not a risk factor, nor is treated thyroid dysfunction. Antithyroid antibodies have been linked to recurrent miscarriages, and polycystic ovarian syndrome has been linked to an increased risk of miscarriage, but the exact mechanism remains unclear. As far as immune factors go, a meta-analysis concluded that the available data are not consistent with more than modest associations between cytokine polymorphisms and recurrent miscarriage. Further research is required to assess the contribution that disordered cytokines make to recurrent miscarriage before routine testing is introduced in clinical practice. We do a lot of torch screening. But for any severe infection causing bacteremia or viremia can cause sporadic miscarriage, and the role of infection in RPL is unclear. For an infective agent to be implicated for recurrent pregnancy loss, it must be capable of persisting in the genital tract. It should be difficult to detect and would cause insufficient symptoms to disturb the woman. Toxoplasmosis, rubella, CMV, herpes, and listeria infections do not fulfill these criteria, and routine torch screening should be abandoned. Presence of bacterial vaginosis in the first trimester of pregnancy has been reported as a risk factor for second trimester miscarriage and preterm delivery. For inherited thrombophilic defects have been implicated as a possible cause for RPL, presumed mechanism being thrombosis of the uteroplacental circulation, and established causes of systemic thrombosis in both inherited and acquired thrombophilias include activated protein C resistance, deficiencies of protein C and antithrombin 3, hyperhomocystinemia, and prothrombin gene mutation. So how do you, I've listed possible causes of recurrent pregnancy. So how do you go about investigation such patients? Antiphospholipid antibodies. So we do check lupus anticoagulant and anticardiolipin antibodies, IgG and IgM. The women should be screened before pregnancy, pre-pregnancy, and to diagnose antiphospholipid syndrome, it is mandatory that the woman has 2 positive tests at least 12 weeks apart. So one positive LA or anticardiolipin, IgG and IgM should not lead to a diagnosis of antiphospholipid syndrome. There should be 2 positive tests 12 weeks apart before she's pregnant. And for either lupus anticoagulant or the anticardiolipin antibodies, IgG and IgM. So both these tests should be done at least twice. For karyotyping, we also do these tests for couples with the recurrent pregnancy loss, and as we all know, it is quite expensive. And what is the recommendation is that should be performed on products of conception of the 3rd and subsequent consecutive miscarriages. So it should not be, the conceptus should not be karyotyped if it is the 2nd, but it is the 3rd or the 4th when this test should be done. And parental peripheral blood karyotyping of both partners is not routinely recommended and should be done only after individual risk assessment, and in couples where testing of products of conception reports an unbalanced structural chromosomal abnormality. Let's look at the anatomical factors. All women should have an assessment of uterine anatomy. Those who have been labeled as recurrent pregnancy losses, where 2 pregnancy losses have happened. Initial screening should be by a 3-dimensional transvaginal ultrasound, which can distinguish between septate uterus and bicorporeal uterus with normal cervix and biconvate uterus. Sonohysterography is more accurate than hysterosalpingography in diagnosing uterine malformations, and SHG can be used to evaluate uterine morphology when 3D ultrasound is not available or when tubal patency has to be investigated too. If a Mullerian uterine malformation is diagnosed, further investigation of the kidneys and urinary tract should be considered, and MRI is not recommended as the first-line option, can be done when 3D ultrasound is not available. So 2 tests, 3D ultrasounds and sonohysterography are the first test then you need to do to exclude anatomical factors for recurrent pregnancy loss. As far as immunological screening is concerned, HLA determination in women with RPL is not recommended in clinical practice. So when you're managing patients in your clinics, this is not a test which is recommended. It is in the research setting when it can be done. And similarly, cytokine testing and cytokine polymorphisms should not be tested in women with RPL. Anti-nuclear antibodies testing should be considered for explanatory purposes, where you need to give certain explanations to the couple and you've done other tests, and this might help in giving certain explanations. For thrombophilia, for women with RPL, do not screen for hereditary thrombophilia unless in a research setting or in women with additional risk factors for thrombophilia. So it is not a routine test which you need to do. For metabolic and endocrine abnormalities, thyroid screening includes TSH and thyroid peroxidase antibodies in women with recurrent pregnancy loss. If TSH is abnormal, and TPO antibody levels should be followed up by thyroxine, free T4. In assessment of polycystic ovarian syndrome, fasting insulin and fasting glucose is not recommended in women with RPL to improve next pregnancy prognosis. So it will not improve the prognosis for next pregnancy. If a woman with polycystic ovarian syndrome, you do not need to do fasting insulin or fasting glucose in every PCOS patient. Prolactin testing is not recommended in the absence of clinical symptoms of hyperprolactinemia, which is oligo and menorrhea and amenorrhea. Testing is not routinely recommended for ovarian reserve, luteal phase insufficiency, androgen levels, LH levels, homocysteine plasma levels, and vitamin D. These tests are not required. So, after screening, what are the treatment options for different patients? So we must not forget that the loss of pregnancy at any stage can be a devastating experience, and particular sensitivity is required. And counseling couples, they should be sitting together, preferably at a dedicated RPL clinic. Accurate information should be given to facilitate decision-making about future pregnancies, and clearly written patient leaflets are recommended to provide written information that the couple can take home. And in the ESHRE guidelines, there is a lot of mention about looking at the emotional and psychological implications on the man also, because we tend to forget and we just focus on the woman and forget the man in this scenario. So how do you treat antiphospholipid syndrome? What is recommended? For women who fulfill the laboratory criteria of antiphospholipid syndrome and have a history of 3 or more pregnancy losses, remember, 3 or more pregnancy losses, then start low-dose aspirin, 75 to 100 milligram per day before conception. Start before conception. And add a prophylactic dose of heparin or low molecular weight heparin on the day when her pregnancy test is positive. So if she's had 3 pregnancy losses, this is the treatment suggested. However, if she has 2 pregnancy losses and antiphospholipid syndrome, then the anticoagulant should only be offered in the research setting, not as a routine clinical treatment. About the genetic factors, the finding of an abnormal parental karyotype should prompt referral to a clinical geneticist. And genetic counseling offers the couple a prognosis for the risk of future pregnancies with an unbalanced chromosome complement and the opportunity for familial chromosomal studies. Reproductive options in couples with chromosomal rearrangements include proceeding to a further natural pregnancy with or without a prenatal diagnostic test, gamete donation, and adoption. And we know gamete donation is not an option in Pakistan. And it is also very important that when you offer the genetic testing to the couples, you must ask them what will they do with this knowledge. And a lot of people say, this will be our child, and no matter what, we don't think of an abortion. And then they say, okay, why should we spend so much money for this genetics testing and not do anything with the information that we get? So all this should be discussed in the clinic before we order these expensive tests. About the anatomical factors, whether hysteroscopic septum resection has beneficial effects should be ovulated in the context of surgical trials in women with RPL and septate uterus. There is no conclusive evidence yet if excising the septum helps in pregnancy outcome. Metroplasty is not recommended for bicorporeal uterus with normal cervix, and uterine reconstruction is not recommended for uniconvate uterus. There is insufficient evidence supporting hysteroscopic removal of submucosal fibroids or endometrial polyps. And we were discussing just the, this management yesterday about fibroids. So this is what the ESHRE guidelines is saying, that there is no insufficient evidence regarding removing this, whether it helps with the pregnancy outcomes of the next pregnancy. Surgical removal of intramural fibroids is not recommended, and there is insufficient evidence to recommend removing fibroids that distort the uterine cavity. For cervical weakness, women with a history of second trimester pregnancy losses and suspected cervical weakness should be offered serial cervical sonographic surveillance. And in women with a singleton pregnancy and a history of recurrent second trimester pregnancy loss attributable to cervical weakness, a cerclage could be considered. There is no evidence that this treatment increases perinatal survival. And how do you monitor an ultrasound? It is a cerclage should be offered if a cervical length of 25 millimeters or less is detected by transvaginal scan before 24 weeks of gestation. For endocrine factors, there is insufficient evidence to recommend the use of progesterone to improve live birth rate in women with recurrent pregnancy loss and luteal phase insufficiency. HCG to improve live birth rate in women with RPL and luteal phase insufficiency. There is insufficient evidence about these three things. Even metformin supplementation in pregnancy to prevent pregnancy loss in women with RPL and glucose metabolism defects. So there is insufficient evidence about the use of these three drugs, whether it improves the pregnancy outcome. Bromocriptine treatment can be considered in women with RPL and hyperprolactinemia to increase live birth rate, and preconception counseling in women with RPL should include general advice to consider prophylactic vitamin D supplementation, although vitamin D supplementation has not shown an improved outcomes for recurrent pregnancy loss. There is insufficient evidence to evaluate the effect of HCG supplementation in pregnancy to prevent a miscarriage in women with RPL, and metformin supplementation in pregnancy to prevent a miscarriage in women with recurrent miscarriage. Suppression of high LH levels among ovulatory women with recurrent miscarriage and PCOS does not improve the live birth rate. Overt hypothyroidism arising before conception or during early gestation should be treated with levothyroxine, and treatment of women with subclinical hypothyroidism may reduce the risk of miscarriage, but the potential benefit of treatment should be balanced against the risks. And there is insufficient evidence to support treatment with levothyroxine in euthyroid women with thyroid antibodies and RPL outside a clinical trial. Immunotherapy in women with previous unexplained recurrent miscarriage, live birth rate does not improve with any of these listed immunotherapy options, and immune treatment should not be offered routinely to women with recurrent miscarriage. For inherited thrombophilias, as you saw, it is not recommended that they should be investigated in a clinical setting, and similarly not to use antithrombotic prophylaxis unless in the context of research or if indicated for venous thromboembolism prevention. So what therapeutic interventions do you offer to couples with RPL due to male factor? Couples with RPL should be informed that smoking, alcohol consumption, obesity, and excessive exercise could have a negative effect on their chances of a live birth. So everything in moderation is good, including exercise. And therefore, cessation of smoking, normal body weight, limited alcohol, and normal exercise pattern is recommended. Sperm selection is not recommended, and oxidants for men have not been shown to improve the chance of a live birth. So basically this slide tells you, the importance of TLC or tender love and care, which is the most important aspect for a couple with recurrent pregnancy loss. Briefly about the PROMISE study, as you know, the results came out, and those who received progesterone treatment in early pregnancy were no less likely to miscarry than who received placebo. So basically, progesterone did not affect the outcome, and this was whatever the age, ethnicity, medical history, pregnancy history, and nearly 2/3 of the women in the trial had the baby, whether they had progesterone or the placebo. But the positive was that it was used in pregnancy and there were no adverse effects on the baby. So it is a safe drug if used in early pregnancy. And then there is this PRISM trial, which was done on randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, and which progesterone, looking at whether progesterone can prevent miscarriage in women with early pregnancy who were bleeding. And the result also came out in May 2019, and it said that progesterone during the first trimester did not result in a significantly higher incidence of live births than amongst those who had a placebo. But a subgroup of women with 3 or more previous miscarriages before the current pregnancy showed a significant improvement in outcome for those who had progesterone. Very small improved outcome for those who had 1 or 2 previous miscarriages. So there was some beneficial effect in women with recurrent pregnancy loss, but not the women who had threatened miscarriage in their first or second pregnancies. So oral dydrogesterone in women with recurrent pregnancy loss showed a benefit in reducing subsequent risk of miscarriage, complete with placebo. And micronized vaginal progesterone during early pregnancy has no beneficial effect in women with unexplained recurrent pregnancy loss. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azra, for such a nice presentation. And now I would like to invite Dr. Aisha Malik on the stage for her presentation.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to congratulate Professor Sadia Paul on this very informative fertility meeting on the occasion of the Concept Fertility Center discussion, and the level of discussion and my preceders, आपको काफ़ी overflow of knowledge हुआ होगा, बल्कि आपको लग रहा होगा कि आपने बहुत ज़्यादा knowledge accumulate किया है, which I was also feeling about the optimal ovulation induction protocols by Professor Arshad Chauhan, and also about the management of recurrent pregnancy loss, which is also a very difficult topic and which takes a lot to absorb. So my topic is, hopefully it's going to be lighter, it's going to be shorter, and I hope कि आपकी interaction भी उसमें शामिल रहेगी. So this is about polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I'm chairperson of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology from King Edward Medical University and its affiliated Lady Wellington Hospital, being the largest maternity hospital in Pakistan. And I chose this topic because, one, I'm interested in it. Second, I think it's an enigma. Enigma ban gaya hamare liye, ya ek intriguing topic ban gaya, because every second person, woman who walks into your clinic seems to be suffering from polycystic ovaries. Isn't that so? और पहले ऐसा नहीं था. In my practice, I've been practicing for 20 years. तो मुझे लगे कि जैसे ये PCO यूं जा रहा है, it's going upwards like that. So I have been questioning myself कि जिनको हम PCO समझ रहे हैं, आया कि वो वाकई PCO हैं? क्या आपको यकीन है कि वो PCO की पेशेंट होती हैं? Anyone volunteering from the audience? जी आप? हाँ,
So overall, the polycystic ovarian syndrome ratio is getting up, and it's increasing not only regarding or related to the fertility issues, even the young girls are coming up, and the counseling is needed for the parents to keep a balanced diet and to keep a check and balance on the girls. And with the counseling I have seen in the area of southern Punjab, where I am practicing, and a lot of counseling sessions I am doing there, and now the mothers, they are bringing their unmarried girls, and it's really getting common, but you cannot comment that every patient coming up and you are thinking like it's a polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Thank you, very well answered. आपका नाम क्या है डॉक्टर साहब?
Aisha Zafar.
ठीक है, Aisha myself. So I think this was what I was going to say. You've put it very well. कि we do need to work it up then जब हमें एक suspicion मिलती है. We need to look into it, but we need to keep in mind कि ये चीज़ें हैं. And I think the sedentary lifestyle, because हम जो खेलते थे, कूदते थे, छलांगे मारते थे, बच्चे आजकल सारा वक्त बैठे रहते हैं on the computer and on the net. And I think that also has an effect, the level of activity which you indulge in. So anyway, we'll talk about, क्योंकि आप सबको ही पता है PCOS में क्या है, so we'll talk about different क्या है या updates क्या हैं on the diagnosis and on the management. But obviously we know कि ये एक spectrum है. We know that it is because of the imbalance of hormones and the male type of hormones are somehow being synthesized more in these women. जब वो male type hormones बन रहे हैं, androgenic hormones, तो they are causing certain symptoms like hirsutism and acne and ovulatory dysfunction, which would result in infertility. And at the same time, हमारी ये dilemma था कि ये primarily ये metabolic disorder है या ये endocrine disorder है, because insulin resistance is thought to be an important component, और उस insulin resistant की वजह से these women are more likely to develop diabetes later on in life, along with hyperlipidemia and cardiovascular risk factors. So we will have a balanced discussion, but as Aisha rightly pointed out, if you can diagnose it early and you can manage it early, you will definitely give a better outcome to the patient and avoid later on complications. So एक और सवाल जो सब पेशेंट्स पूछते हैं कि what causes it? डॉक्टर साहब मुझे क्यों ये हो गया या मेरी बेटी को ये क्यों हो गया? And they are really very worried about it. And you do not have any clear answers. Obviously we know that there is a genetic predisposition. जिनकी family में run कर रहे, they are more likely to develop it. We would like to say कि जी obesity की वजह से है, but I see so many overweight patients, not necessarily healthy, but they are overweight, और उनके बच्चे पे बच्चा हुआ जा रहा है, so obviously they are not suffering from PCO. So this is something different. This is, and personally I feel that when genetic predisposition overlaps with stress, with time periods in your life such as puberty and with weight changes, it can unmask that genetic predisposition into a full-fledged polycystic ovarian syndrome. ये भी चीज़ वही दिखा रहा है कि जो genetic predisposition है, with aging or with effect of certain other things, it will increase the insulin resistance, and on the other side जब weight gain हो रहा है, increased lipid storage and hyperinsulinemia, and in these in turn are altering the hormone synthesis or hormone metabolism, leading to the hyperandrogenism, acne, infertility, so on and so forth. Take home message ये है कि हमें इसको मल्टी फेसेटेड लेवल्स पे अटैक करना है। अगर हमने इसको काबू करना है PCO को, तो वी हैव टू हैव ऑल दीज फैक्टर्स इन आवर माइंड, बिकॉज वन सिंगल अप्रोच may not give you the successful management which you or your patient may desire. Again, showing the balance, बीच में आपके genetics हैं, body mass index है और lifestyle है, and these factors can swing just the PCO morphology, जिसमें ovulatory cycle हो सकता है with no other features, into the full-fledged PCO syndrome with all the problems of menstrual irregularity, infertility, obesity, acne. फ़र्क क्या है बीच में दोनों का probably genetic predisposition same है, लेकिन अगर ये दरमियान वाली genetics को तो आप alter नहीं कर सकते, आप alter कर सकते हैं BMI को और आप alter कर सकते हैं lifestyle को, और अगर आप इन चीज़ों को control रखेंगे तो जो PCO की morphology या जो tendency है, that will not go out of control. And that is what I counsel my PCO patients, that yes, you can be cured. ये एक ऐसी चीज़ है जो मुकम्मल तौर पर गायब भी हो सकती है. Your scan may revert back to normal. वो कहती है मैडम वो डॉक्टर साहब PCO ठीक हो जाएगा, गायब हो जाएगा. And I say जी हाँ ये ठीक हो जाएगा, आप अल्ट्रासाउंड कराएंगी कुछ माह बाद, and जो उनके ज़हन में है PCO, the ovarian morphology will be normal. You see patients like that, don't you? कि जिनकी अल्ट्रासाउंड में एक दफ़ा PCO टाइप morphology आती है, they lose weight, they do some therapy, they come back, and the ultrasound, the same ultrasound specialist may be saying there is no more PCO, and then they may show ovulation positive, and then they may become pregnant. So this is the good thing about this disorder. Obviously ये सारी चीज़ें हमें फेस करनी पड़ रही होती हैं. Some people come with more of one, यानी ज़रूरी नहीं जैसे book picture आपको हर एक में मिले. Some people may have one feature, some may have the other feature, some may have a combination, but these are the overlapping symptoms which you would see. I also feel concerned because हम ये adolescent बच्चियों में काफ़ी देखते हैं, और this is the time जिसमें ऊपर आपने देखा right hand side पे कि this is the time when you're young, you are beautiful, and this disease mars the beauty of these young girls जो prime of life पे हैं, and they start gaining weight, and they start putting on acne हो जाती है, hirsutism, and they sort of get disfigured, is the way I look at it. Apart from other problems, this is a very major problem. Ye again showing the spectrum of this condition, polycystic ovarian syndrome. We know कि cycles anovulatory हैं और hyperestrogenism है. Unopposed estrogen would be in the long term causing a risk factor for C. endometrium also. We also know that there is hyperinsulinemia and they are at risk of diabetes, and because of the lipid metabolism disturbance, there is tendency for atherosclerosis and for long-term cardiovascular side effects. इसमें चैलेंज क्या आ जाता है, जैसे मैंने कहा कि जो हर पेशेंट आपके पास आ रही है क्या वो PCO की पेशेंट है. नो सिंगल टेस्ट कैन बी यूज्ड फॉर डायग्नोसिस, एंड सबको ही पता है कि 2 out of 3 डायग्नोस्टिक क्राइटेरिया अगर हैं तो वी विल कॉल इट PCO, और वी वुड से कि ये डायग्नोसिस हो सकता है, विच इज़ 3 कौन से हैं? इनफ्रीक्वेंट एंड इरेगुलर मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल, एविडेंस ऑफ हाइपरएंड्रोजेनिज्म, and the appearance of polycystic ovary on ultrasound. And obviously you corroborate it with your medical and physical examination. जिसमें BMI is important, blood pressure is important, thyroid को देखना important है, breast especially इसके अंदर कई दफ़ा breast secretion may be present because of accompanying hyperprolactinemia. And obviously the extent and pattern of hair distribution is important. ये आपने सबने बुक्स में देखा होगा, एशरे और रॉटनडैम क्राइटेरिया ऑफ जैसे कि ये ओवरलैप कर रहे हैं. ऑल 3 may be present, but if any 2 are present, you can label the patient as PCO. इसमें अभी रिवाइज्ड जो एशरे का क्राइटेरिया आया है, that is showing कि they endorse this for adult women, but in the adolescent age group, you may have to be a little more discerning about the ultrasound. कि अल्ट्रासाउंड आपको पता है जो गर्ल्स अराउंड प्यूबर्टी दे डू टेंड टू हैव एनोवुलेटरी साइकिल्स एनीवे and they may show cysts in their ovaries, and it means that every young girl who comes in with irregular cycle and with the cysts in the ovary is not polycystic ovarian syndrome. So these are the guidelines. They show that now they are not recommended in diagnosis for those within 8 years of menarche. Hamari average age of menarche is how much? Kittni, madam? 11, उससे भी पीछे कई दफ़ा 9, 10, 11. तो इट मीन्स कि हम पहले जो 18 साल की एज तक में भी हम उनकी अल्ट्रासाउंड पे इतना ज़्यादा फोकस ना करें. किस पे ना, क्यों ना करें? बिकॉज देयर इज़ अ लॉट ऑफ ओवरलैप एंड देन दैट कैन अफेक्ट द एक्यूरेसी ऑफ द अल्ट्रासाउंड. हमारी बुक्स में टिपिकल पिक्चर है कि पर्ल नेकलेस अपीयरेंस ऑफ द ओवरी विद मल्टीपल सब कैप्सुलर फॉलिकुलर डेवलपमेंट in single view. So these are the exact criteria which have been revised, and they say that with a gynecological age of less than 8 years after menarche, there is a high incidence of multifollicular ovaries in this stage of life, and ultrasound anyway should be, or obviously आप unmarried बच्चियों की mostly बात कर रहे हैं, whereas TVS is more preferred for diagnosis of PCO if sexually active and if it is acceptable to the individual. And the threshold for polycystic ovarian syndrome should be on either ovary, a follicle number per ovary of more than 20 and or an ovarian volume of more than 10 mils, ensuring that you are not counting the corpus luteum or other cysts or dominant follicles in that ovarian volume. And in patients with irregular menstrual cycle and hyperandrogenism, an ovarian ultrasound is not necessary for PCOS diagnosis. However, it will help identify the complete PCOS phenotype. So what is the phenotype? Because इसमें इतनी variation है, so it's, they say for classification, you can define them into these 4 phenotypes depending कि आपकी कौन सी चीज़ overlap कर रही है. Androgen excessive hair growth है और irregular menses हैं और PCO ultrasound पे भी है, तो then that is the phenotype A. सब तीनों चीज़ें present हैं. But for example ovulatory dysfunction है और androgen excess है but ultrasound पे PCO नहीं है, so that is phenotype B. Hirsutism है और PCO की पिक्चर है लेकिन साइकिल शायद रेगुलर हो, तो that is phenotype C. And irregular menses हैं और ovarian PCO है लेकिन hirsutism और acne नहीं है, that is phenotype D. Management पे इतना फ़र्क नहीं पड़ेगा, but it's useful to have a baseline picture of the patient. And again, we are looking at the same investigations. You know the list जो आप करा रहे हैं. So management का बहुत challenge है. Okay, डॉक्टर साहब PCO है या उस टाइप की आपकी पिक्चर आ रही है, how will you manage? कैसे करेंगे manage? So in my mind, I have sort of divided, and I think आप भी करते होंगे कि there are certain things जिसके लिए patient आपके पास आई है. For example, अगर adolescent बच्ची है तो उसकी माँ का main concern है hirsutism and irregular menses, कि periods नहीं आ रहे और weight बढ़ता जा रहा है. And fertility is not a concern at that point. So you will do some measures जिससे symptoms relieve हों, and you will do some other measures because you know कि underlying PCO है, so to modify the disease process. And I think the second part is very important, लेकिन first part आपको करना होता है for patient immediate satisfaction. And this is the most important part for management of PCO, which is the most difficult, क्योंकि patient को आप 2 गोलियां लिखते हैं वो खुश हैं, उनको आप कहें कि lifestyle modify करें, you have to spend a lot of time, you have to convince them and give them the exact diet restrictions. अब वो आजकल बच्चियाँ बहुत सी कीटो डाइट और ये डाइट और वो डाइट, लेकिन basically the principle is the same कि आपने कार्बोहाइड्रेट और फैट रिस्ट्रिक्ट करना है, and if you can reduce the glycemic index even by up to 85%, it will improve the menstrual cycle regularity within 6 months. इससे ज़्यादा वादा तो हम कर नहीं सकते. Healthy lifestyle should be recommended. अब ये ASHRAE की guidelines हैं. In all and physical activity should be recommended in all those with PCOS to achieve and maintain healthy weight and to optimize hormonal outcome. And lifestyle intervention should include behavioral strategies such as goal setting, self-monitoring. For example, अगर मैं जिम जा रही हूँ तो मेरा एम होगा कि शायद हफ्ते में 0.5 kg मेरा कम हो जाए. होता तो नहीं, लेकिन आप गोल तो सेट करते हैं. Anybody embarking upon a treatment should be given some feedback and some goals which they can see to be achieved. But this is very promising. They're saying कि अगर आप रिस्ट्रिक्ट कर वेट लॉस कर लें, मतलब फॉर एग्जांपल आपके मेरे पास ख़वातीन आती हैं जिनका 100 किलो तक वेट होता है, 95 kg, 85 kg, 100 kg, आम बात है. एंड दे डोंट हैव टू कम टू द मॉडल लाइक वेट. उन्होंने अपना आइडियल वेट नहीं अचीव करना. इवन इफ़ दे कैन reduce their weight by 30%, 15 to 30%, you would see the improvement, that they would immediately have a normalizing their menstrual cycle, their response to the ovulation induction therapy will improve, and the benefit in terms of all their clinical symptoms will be evident within less. And इसमें इन्होंने कहा है कि metformin we were talking about. So first is the exercise and diet. Second is the role of metformin, and all the evidence says that metformin does have a role. And in adult women, you should adjust the dosage according to the BMI. Obviously, if the BMI is more than 25, you can give metformin. And especially to those metabolic groups जिनमें diabetes का risk high है, जिनमें impaired glucose tolerance है, or who are in the high risk ethnic group. And by the way, we are all in the high risk ethnic group because being Southeast Asians, we are all at a high risk. Where metformin is performed, the following need to be considered. Adverse effects बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं है, gastrointestinal side effects हैं जिनकी प्रोफेसर चौहान ने भी बात की थी. So then you can, they are self-limiting usually, and you can individualize or you can reduce and then increase in incremental manner. Start at a low dose and then increase it. इनोसिटॉल का आजकल बहुत ज़्यादा हुआ है, माइफोलिक, इनोसिटॉल, उसकी ढेरों प्रेपरेशंस मार्केट में आ चुकी हैं. I have prescribed them myself, लेकिन जो evidence है, it says that it should be considered an experimental therapy in PCOS, जिसमें अभी evidence emerge हो रहा है, which will show us exactly कितना इसका role है. But having said that, there is no harm because we all know it's a form of vitamin B. So अगर आप दे देंगे तो there is no harm and she may be benefiting. Evidence is not conclusive. Menstrual irregularity भी थोड़ा सा सोचने की बात है कि they are saying कि इसको आप मेनाकी से relate करें, and if it is less with 1 to 3 years after menarche, if it is less than 21 or more than 45 days cycle, then you will consider it irregular. वरना ये नहीं है कि हर एक का ideal 28 day cycle होगा. प्लस और माइनस 7 days तो हम देते ही हैं, देते. दे आर सेइंग कि आप 7 दिन और दे दें, आप 45 days या 1.5 महीना भी वेट कर लें. इन द इनिशियल अप टू 3 years आफ्टर, इवन दैट इज़ कंसिडर्ड नॉर्मल. और समझ लें कि अगर 3 years आफ्टर मेनार्की, यानी अगर 11 की साल पे हुई तो 14-15 साल तक, अगर साल में 8 periods भी आ जाएं तो दैट इज़ नॉर्मल. अगर 8 से भी कम आते हैं, यू नीड टू बी कंसर्न. या एक और तरीका कि अगर 3 माह माहवारी नहीं आ रही, 90 days, then you need to be concerned right from the beginning. इसका मतलब क्या है कि जो हाइपोथैलेमिक पिट्यूटरी ओवेरियन एक्सिस है वो भी मैच्योर कर रही है. तो मैं पेशेंट्स को आमतौर पे कहती हूँ कि जब आप गाड़ी को ट्रैक पे डालते हैं तो उसको शुरू में थोड़ा धक्का लगता है, एकदम से वो फुल उस पर नहीं चलती एनर्जी पे. तो आप समझिए कि अभी ये वो इनिशियल फेज़ है कि इट इज़ ऑन द ट्रैक बट अभी इट हैज़ नॉट गेन्ड द फुल momentum. It will come to that, provided कि कोई और adverse effect ना हो. So we can be patient, we can say, लेकिन जैसे मैं पूछूँ 1.5 माह में खुद से आ जाती है, 2 माह में आ जाती है तो चलें ठीक है initially in the teens. लेकिन अगर 3 माह नहीं आती तो so even without looking at these guidelines, I think this is what we were practicing. कि अगर 3 माह नहीं आती, 6 माह रुक जाती है, then there is need for concern. And obviously we manage them for reassurance by oral contraceptive pills, combination of ethinyl estradiol and micronized progesterone for oligmenoric patients or amenorrheic patients. And now the advancement in that is कि आप एंटी एंड्रोजेनिक कंपोनेंट रखें विच वुड गिव बेनिफिट फॉर हिर्सुटिज्म ऑल्सो। एंड ये भी बड़ा होता है कि जी पहले साइकिल रेगुलर करेंगे, पहले वेट कम करें, पहले ओवुलेशन इंडक्शन करें, नहीं हमें तो पहले मेरा वज़न कम होगा फिर मैं तो यू हैव टू टेल इट्स अ मल्टी अटैक हमने जो हर एंगल से करना है। सो वन वुड गिव द वेट रिडक्शन विद द मेटफॉर्मिन विद द OCP ऑल्सो, बिकॉज वो आपके उसको ओवेरियन चीज़ों को ठीक कर रही होगी। सो मल्टी फैक्टोरियल डिजीज़ कैरेक्टराइज और एक्नी भी साथ प्रॉब्लम हो रही है। आई वॉन्ट टॉक अबाउट द एक्नी दो दिस इज़ वेरी कॉमन, और इसके लिए ये कि आप लोकल ट्रीटमेंट अदर देन यू आर वेटिंग कि ये सारी मेजर्स काम करें, यू कैन गिव लोकल ट्रीटमेंट फॉर एक्नी। बट दीज आर द ओरल कॉन्ट्रासेप्टिव्स में चॉइसेस जो आपकी टिपिकल है ना लीवोनॉर्जेस्ट्रॉल, मतलब जिसमें लीवोनॉर्जेस्ट्रल कंपोनेंट है, उसका एंटी एंड्रोजेनिक इफेक्ट नहीं है। इट इज़ बेटर टू हैव अ प्रेपरेशन जिसमें ड्रास्पेरिनॉन हो जिसका +1 है, and the best would be to have a combination जिसमें ciprotron acetate हो which would give the maximum benefit in terms of anti-androgenic effect. And जो हेयर फॉलिकल्स आ चुके हैं वी नो कि वो कोर्स टर्मिनल हेयर हैं और वो फर्दर हेयर ग्रोथ तो नहीं होगी, बट फॉर दोज यू वुड हैव टू सजेस्ट एक्नी के लिए मे बी एरिथ्रोमाइसिन और आइजोट्रेटिनॉन विच इज़ वेरी इफेक्टिव, बट द पेशेंट शुड नॉट हैव एनी चांस ऑफ बिकमिंग प्रेगनेंट। अनमैरिड में आप दे सकते हैं और 6 मंथ्स में उनकी एक्नी क्लियर हो जाएगी। पेशेंट फॉर लाइफ आपके लिए आपसे ग्रेटफुल होगी, बट इट कैन रिकर। और हेयर ग्रोथ obviously you can use the cosmetic measures. So treatment of PCOS with ethinyl estradiol and ciprotron acetate induces important favorable changes regarding hormonal parameters associated with hyperandrogenism, and you can see that but it does not significantly change the carbohydrate metabolism. So with that we should add an insulin sensitizer, let's put it that way. एंड जो भी डॉक्टर अज़रा ने भी बात की कि इन पेशेंट्स में भी एक डिप्रेसिव और एंजाइटी का एलिमेंट है जो हमें रिकग्नाइज करना है हेल्थ केयर प्रोवाइडर्स को, एंड वी शुड एड्रेस इट। और इट equally important as the pharmacological management is the psychological support. Tell them that this is half of the children I'm seeing, yeah, the patients have this problem, they do improve, it is not a disease, and you will be fine, you will get better with your own effort. And infertility I will not touch because वो बहुत डिटेल में डिस्कस हुई है, बट एक मैं गलती देखती हूँ कि PCO लेबल करके कई दफ़ा गलत लेबल करके उसके पीछे पड़ जाते हैं और बाकी सारे पैरामीटर्स को छोड़ देते हैं। एंड फॉर एजेस एंड एजेस यू सी कि 3 साल गुजर गए हैं और वो गोलियों टॉफ़ियों की तरह वो औरत क्लोमिफेन सिट्रेट या लेजरा की लेट्रोजोल की प्रेपरेशन खाती जा रही है और आज तक सीमेन एनालिसिस या ट्यूबल पेटेंसी टेस्ट हुआ ही नहीं। सो वी शुड नॉट लूज़ साइट ऑफ द ब्रॉडर पिक्चर। अगर हमें PCO नज़र आ गया हम उसके पीछे भाग पड़े हैं, वी शुड कीप द अदर थिंग्स इन माइंड ऑल्सो। And obviously lastly in maybe IVF का criteria है as for any other patient who's not conceiving. Now we are coming to the end. तो step by step ये प्रोफेसर चौहान ने बड़े अच्छे तरीके से बता दिया था, but there is clear guidelines के जो PCO के patients हैं उनमें letrozole would be the first choice because they show better response to letrozole as compared to clomiphene citrate. अगर कोई इससे डिफ़र करता हो तो यू कैन से आई एम जस्ट टेलिंग द गाइडलाइंस बट माई ओन एक्सपीरियंस इज़ द सेम। सो दिस इज़ PCO ट्रीटमेंट इनफर्टिलिटी स्टेप बाय स्टेप। वो पहला स्टेप ही नहीं उठाती तो उसके आगे जो बाकी स्टेप्स हैं वो हमारे डिले होते हैं, है ना। ऐसे ही अगर कर लें तो जल्दी रिस्पॉन्स मिलेगा हर चीज़ का। सो यू हैव अ गुड आंसर टू पेशेंट्स जो कहते हैं जी मैं 6 महीने से आपके पास आ रही हूँ और अभी तक मेरी क्यों नहीं हुई। तो यू कैन कीप द वेट ऑन day 1 एंड शो देम कि वो 5% रिडक्शन आएगी तो ये सारी दवाइयाँ जादू की तरह काम करेंगी, बट नॉट विदाउट डैट। सो दिस इज़ लेट्रोजोल वाला सिर्फ 3rd पॉइंट देख लें कि दिस शुड बी कंसिडर्ड फर्स्ट लाइन फार्माकोलॉजिकल ट्रीटमेंट फॉर ओवुलेशन इंडक्शन। बाकी तो सब वही हैं। मल्टीपल प्रेगनेंसी ऑब्वियसली शुड बी केप्ट इन माइंड। एंड ये लास्ट स्लाइड है, सेकेंड लास्ट, कि पेशेंट को कोई हौसला भी चाहिए, उसको एक लॉन्ग टर्म ट्रीटमेंट में कोई पॉजिटिविटी भी चाहिए। सो आई ऑलवेज इनकरेज माई पेशेंट्स के वो कहती प्रेग्नेंट नहीं हुई, मैंने कहा लेकिन आपको पीरियड्स तो खुद से आ गए, आए कि नहीं, आपको तो विड्रॉल ब्लीडिंग नहीं करानी पड़ी. So that is a positive sign. You have resumed your menstrual cycle. Inshallah, the next step would be that you should become pregnant. आपके जो ये हाइपर एंड्रोजेनिक फीचर्स हैं वो कम हुए, हाँ जी हुए, तो फिर आप खुश हैं. एंड बायोकेमिकल पैरामीटर्स आप टेस्ट करा के दे सकते हैं, फास्टिंग ग्लूकोज इंसुलिन रेशियो, एंड एवरीथिंग विल बी इम्प्रूविंग स्टेप बाय स्टेप बाय स्टेप. प्रेगनेंसी में किसी ने भी जिक्र किया, प्रोफेसर असरानी, शायद के रिकरेंट प्रेगनेंसी लॉस का रिस्क है, एंड इट इज़, आई थिंक उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं है, आई एम कन्फ्यूज, बल्कि इसको बाद में डिस्कस करेंगे कि इट इज़ बीन सजेस्टेड टू कंटिन्यू मेटफॉर्मिन इनिशियली इन दीज पेशेंट्स ड्यूरिंग प्रेगनेंसी. हेल्थ रिस्क की बात नहीं करते, वो बहुत लंबे हैं, कार्डियोवेस्कुलर, एंडोमेट्रियल कैंसर, बट इन कंक्लूजन विद इन 8 years हमने एज लिमिट चेंज की, हमने अल्ट्रासाउंड के क्राइटेरिया टाइटन किए हैं. AMH का उन्होंने कहा है कि कोई इतना सिग्निफिकेंट रोल नहीं है, एंड यू डोंट नीड टू डू इट फॉर एवरी पेशेंट. एंड सेल्फ एजुकेशन ऑफ द पेशेंट and a multidisciplinary approach is the best, and depression and anxiety of the patient needs to be addressed. Combined oral preparation वो choose करें जिनमें ciprotron acetate या anti-androgenic progestogen preparation हो. Metformin is recommended, आप confidence से दें. Letrozole is the first choice, and PCO is, जो मैंने, where I began, it is enigmatic, it is not well understood, diagnosis can be tricky, management is age and need oriented, lifestyle modification is the crux, fertility can be difficult, and prevention of long-term implication remains to be a challenge for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Aisha, for such a nice presentation and very comprehensive detail about the PCO treatment. And now I would like some comments from the chairpersons, and then we can all proceed for tea.
Thank you to all the presenters for excellent presentations. I just have a couple of comments, and then we can have questions from the audience, from the speakers. In terms of recurrent pregnancy loss, I think the most difficult cases to manage are the ones which are unexplained. Obviously, if you do not know the cause, then you do not know how to treat them. And the other dilemma that we face is that in order to label them unexplained, that's a diagnosis of exclusion. You have to rule out all the causes before you can say that these cases are unexplained. Most of the investigations that we need to do to rule out the causes are very expensive, and there is a large group of patients who cannot afford to have all the investigations done. And I have an example. For example, I had a patient who had come to us from a village, and she had had 9 first trimester miscarriages, and she had been to local doctors, but nobody had investigated her as such. So we were able to do our first line of investigations, in which we did the APL screening, and she came out to be APL positive. So before we could diagnose a cause, she had to undergo 9 miscarriages because of maybe lack of awareness in the area with the local doctors. Now the next dilemma was that when she became pregnant, to treat APLL, you require the patient to take an Eclexane injection every day, and that's very expensive. I think recent cost of one 40-unit injection is probably, with the dollar rate gone up, is 800 or something like that. So it's an expensive treatment, and she was unable to afford that. So we were able to get the company to sponsor her treatment and provide her the injection which she needed to take from the time of conception till she reached 34 weeks of gestation, and she delivered a full-term live baby.
But these are the dilemmas that you face when dealing with patients with recurrent pregnancy losses. Other than that, the other thing which I would like to comment is that a lot of patients who come to us have had TORCH screen done for recurrent pregnancy loss. Now that is also expensive investigation, but TORCH infections have no role in recurrent miscarriages, and they don't need to be done as part of your investigations for such patients. Now I would ask my colleague to make his comments.
I won't comment on the cost of things in Pakistan, but anything that's obviously costly and of suspect use from the guidelines is contraindicated. I would actually like to ask a different question to a different person, and that is, what is the cost of LH, recombinant LH, compared to decapeptyl for triggering? Oh, I saw, it was in your store, right. Retract it. I'd like to thank all of the presenters for their excellent talks. If there are no other questions or concerns.
I have an announcement to make, and I wish to, if you allow me.
Yes,
Your
please.
session is over.
Housekeeping.
I would like to thank all the eminent speakers and the panelists for arriving on a Sunday morning so early. All our guests, Professor Aftab Munir, especially all the way from Hyderabad, and Dr. Arshad Chauhan came all the way from Paris. Yes. Our star performer. So thank you, Dr. Arshad, Dr. Azra, and Professor Aisha for these excellent update talks. Look at the hall, it is so impressive for a Sunday morning. Since we've all deserved our tea, the other hall is also efficiently finished on time. We're going to have a little extra 10 minutes, so instead of starting at 11, we'll start at 11:15. Is that okay for the next session? Okay? So you're free now. Thank you.